Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to today's discussion. I am back, I am bald, I am bearded but shaved and beautifully ready for a wonderful League meta overview, reviewing all of the choices that players are making during the opening of the 324 Necropolis League. If you are new to the channel, or maybe you've been a long-time viewer on a hiatus from watching content, because I've been on a hiatus from developing regular content discussions, well, welcome back. You can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about future video discussions just like this one, because we've got a lot of them in store for you this league. So first we're going to examine the data from player choices on the ladder, which is available. All the numbers that we're compiling and looking at today is available through the Path of Exile official ladders, as is then compiled and presented through PoE Ninja. Then secondly, we're going to observe those trends across multiple different formats. I'm not taking a look at Ruthless this time. In the past, I've taken a look at Ruthless. Today, we're just going to be focusing in on softcore Necropolis, hardcore Necropolis, and then the solo self-found versions of softcore and hardcore Necropolis. And then thirdly, the last thing I want to do is I want to shape a conversation for you so that way you can actually do something with this data. You as a player can actually benefit from this data. It's great to just have a nice podcast on in the background on your phone or on a second screen, or just listening as you're playing Path of Exile, or while you're going on a run, thinking about your characters and thinking about the trends and discussions going on in Path of Exile. That's all great to do. But I want to equip you with more than just a great discussion today. I want to equip you with the ability to actually make decisions for how you're going to interact with the league, either as a buyer or as a seller moving forward. As you are playing and enjoying Path of Exile, how can you leverage the data of opening weekend for your benefit? So to ease our way into observing and examining player choices, we see the three most popular builds in softcore right now overall are Lightning Arrow Deadeye, with more than 3,000 players playing this. More than 2,800 players playing Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction specifically, not just Detonate Dead. I need to point that out. There are some players who I've seen both on the forums as well as on the Path of Exile subreddit for building, not the primary Path of Exile subreddit, but the Path of Exile build subreddit, who have been complaining and having a hard time playing Detonate Dead. It's because you're playing Detonate Dead wrong or suboptimally, or the least fun way to play it, at least according to most people's evaluation. You want to be able to play with the setup of that alternate gem, Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction. It vastly changes your gameplay experience as a Necromancer. I think like 98% of the ladder is playing this as a Necromancer, and there's like 2% of the league or maybe even it's only 1%. That's playing it in a not Necromancer format. I don't know why you would want to. Maybe it's just for some elemental shenanigans. But anyway, that's the second most popular league in terms of player count. And then Elemental Hit of the Spectrum Deadeye has got 2,600 plus players. Now, why does all of this matter? I'm going to give you a little bit of a tease here about how to leverage this information for you. As a buyer and as a player, this means that you can know the three top builds, and you know that there's going to be a lot of extra items floating around because a lot of players are playing these builds, are crafting items for these builds, are failing crafts for these particular builds, and then putting those failed crafts up to try and recuperate some of the lost cost of the failed craft. So in other words, if you're a buyer, this is very helpful to know about these three top most popular builds, because if you're playing one of these builds, you can go, hey, there's going to be more supply for these items that are out there for me and for my build to potentially upgrade. As a seller, this gives you information because it helps you target your demographic about certain specific items that you want to produce, or items that you're just looking for and adjusting your loot filter to be aware of, to then be able to sell to these, 7,000 plus players who are all playing these couple of builds. And so if you can identify either as a buyer or as a seller, what are the top builds, that helps inform you and allows you to make better decisions economically moving forward with your character and interacting with the league. Back to the data. There are more than 75,000 total ladder players across these four different formats of 324 Necropolis League. We've got more than 52,000 of those players in Necropolis Softcore, more than 8,000 in Hardcore, 10,000 in Softcore Solo Self-Found Necropolis, and then over 3,500 over in Hardcore Solo Self-Found Necropolis League. You will immediately begin to notice some trends over on the left-hand side of your screen. There's going to be a whole lot of Deadeyes showing up in softcore. Like we said, obviously that's no shock to us. There's a lot of players who are coming off of a bow enthusiasm league and from magic finding, so probably there's some hangover from that. It's not as though Lightning Arrow suffered any particular major nerfs, and it's not as though Elemental Hit of the Spectrum, came in with some massive nerfs or anything like that. So a lot of players really had their builds picked, and we see that with the trends for Deadeye in softcore. But the thing that's very, very interesting across the board is that Necromancer is coming in and is probably going to grow. Necromancer is very, very strong as a league starter, just regardless of what league it is. You can just go back throughout the history of Path of Exile. Necromancer is very, very strong, whether or not you're a self-caster or if you're a summoner player. So not all of these players are summoner players. And across all formats of Path of Exile, whether or not you want to play a more zoom softcore format, or if you want to play with a more hardcore mindset in mind, where you simply hate dying and you want to keep your XP and maybe keep your character, Necromancer is a pretty safe pick. Other things that were surprising to me were how high Hierophant and Inquisitor both were across the formats in all of these latest snapshots here on day 3. We don't have full day 3 data because, remember, day 3 data accumulates only after day 3 has passed. So we are on day 3 presently when this video is released, and this is the data that we've got. It's pretty interesting to see where Inquisitor and Hierophant are both relatively competitive. We don't have this massive gap between the top two ascendancy choices and then just everybody else sitting at roughly 8 to 4%. What we've really got is Deadeye, Necro, Inquisitor, Champion, Hierophant, Trickster, kind of rounding out like a top 5 across the way. And then of course invariably, because of Pox and what a great job he does, there's lots of different players playing Righteous Fire as well, and so you see that coming out in multiple different iterations and multiple different ascendancies and a few other builds that are coming out. But you see some consistency at the top across the board with Hierophants, with Champions, with Necromancers, with Deadeyes, particularly in softcore, and with those more defensive-oriented ascendancies like Juggernaut or even Trickster in more hardcore-oriented approaches to playing the Necropolis League. Let's next take a look at the skill gems that players are choosing to use across the board. So we've got Lightning Arrow and Detonate Dead, Explosive Arrow, all coming in as pretty much the top 3 spots, regardless of what league playstyle you're coming in and enjoying. Now, we've also got Bone Shatter mixed in there, Bowl Lightning. You've got Miro Arrow, because there's a whole bunch of people playing the Obama the Obama bomber build. But really what I want to emphasize here is on an early opening weekend, when you are looking and observing a league, one of the traps to fall into is only to look at the main skill links of 5 links. Like on day 1, when you are looking and observing the meta and the emerging choices that players are making, not everybody's got a 5 link. A lot of players won't have 5 links, especially in formats like Ruthless or like Solo Self-Found. It's pretty tough to come across and acquire your 5 link and your 6 link early on day 1, day 2 for the vast majority of players, especially when you're playing with a more limited outlook or limited availability of high-end items like in a Solo Self-Found or Ruthless environment. So the trick here is not just to look at the main skills with the 5+ links on PoE Ninja if you're looking to observe trends. You also just want to look at skill usage in general. The reason why this can be a bit of a trap and a bit of a difficult thing is because, of course, there's a whole lot of skills that players are using just across the board that are very, very helpful utility skills that are not build defining. So, for instance, helpful auras like Clarity, Vitality, Determination, Hatred. Other sorts of utility skills like support gems that get used by a wide variety of builds. Let's say Faster Attacks. Faster Attacks right now might be a support gem that's used by both Lightning Arrow players as well as Elemental Hit players. Both of those, if you're attack-based, you're going to be using potentially increased attacks. Or maybe it's going to be Archmage support, right? Or maybe it's going to be other sorts of caster supports like Burning Damage, which could be used on a wide variety of different builds. Maybe it's mobility skills, whether that's Frost Blink or whether that's Flame Dash. Just because Flame Dash or Frost Blink is on a character doesn't mean that those characters are essentially Frost Blink DPS characters, and that's going to be an emerging archetype of the particular league. So you just got to be careful when you are looking at the differences between the 5 link options that are out there and the data that's reported versus the data that's out there and available for the choices that everybody's making, regardless of how many links that are on there. But there is good data to find out there about potential emerging trends. So for instance, Lightning Arrow right away was something on day 1 that you can go back, you can look at the data snapshot, and you can see Lightning Arrow and then Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction was something that players were looking for on day 1, day 2, and eventually as players continued to unlock and open up more options in the labyrinth and more players were farming the labyrinth, especially for those alternative gems, then there's lots more of that data that becomes available, seeing that players are shaping their builds around those alternative styles of gems that are now populating themselves in the economy. We like spreadsheets. Yes, we do. We like spreadsheets. How about you? Okay, so from the nice polished presentation of Google Slides and overview on the data, let's get into the nitty-gritty of all of the stats that we've got in comparison from the various types of ways to play Path of Exile and enjoy Necropolis right now. If you ever want to take a look at this data, I've got this data available down below in the information added here for the video. This is a beautiful little spreadsheet that we threw together quickly here today just to give you a rough estimate of all of the players that are playing, right? Where are we pulling all this data? Where are we actually evaluating all of the percentages and all of the changes? Now, when we're taking a look at this, there's roughly 52,000 players playing softcore. There's 8,000 players playing hardcore. 10,000 playing solo self-found softcore, and 3,000 or 3,500 playing solo self-found hardcore. Now, it's interesting to note 52,000 of the 75,000 players on the ladder are level 83 and above, because that's just the numbers coming from the softcore ladder. So if you're looking at trends and let's say, for instance, you're saying, oh, well, in hardcore, there's a whole lot more players playing Necromancer than there are players playing Deadeye. Right? So maybe if I'm in hardcore, I ought to be paying attention to that as I'm crafting or as I'm making economic decisions. That's a good decision if you're playing hardcore. If you're playing softcore, though, you need to recognize there's 15% of that league that's going to be playing Deadeye. And you're going to have a massive amount of customers if you're crafting for that 15% of the league, because 15% of like 52,000 is thousands of players, right? So you want to just be aware as you're crafting, as you're selling, how big your market actually is and what your market is going to be searching for, why your item is going to be desirable that you're crafting, that you're finding, that you're setting your loot filter up for. Now, as we take a look at each of these numbers, there's something that is important for us to know, which is the comparison, which is always a discussion that comes up every single league, the comparison between each league as well as the power level of ascendancy that players are feeling across the board in each league, in each environment. So I've divided this up into, of course, the different ways to play Path of Exile, and then a rough number of players that are playing each of the varied ascendancies according to the ladder data that we have today. So you can go in and you can take a look, okay, how many players are roughly across the board, across every style of Path of Exile? How many players are playing Occultist? Well, according to the ladder, about 1,200 players when we add all these numbers and we average it out, or about 1% of all players who are on the ladder, 1.7% are playing Occultist, for example. Whereas when you compare that with Deadeye, you say 11%. Again, don't make that mistake of saying then in a hardcore environment, 11% of the league is playing Deadeye, I ought to start crafting bows like crazy for a bunch of Lightning Arrow players in hardcore. They're not there in hardcore. This is the sum total of all players across the board, giving us a better picture of the power levels, or at least the player perception of power levels across the board in all of Path of Exile. We all know that depending on the way how you play Path of Exile, that's going to shape the character that you choose, and the way how you choose to build out your character to overcome the challenges and to take on the different content that you want to take on and deal with the consequences of death, softcore versus hardcore. But by taking a look at the overall percentage of all of the players playing all of the different ascendancies available, we get a rough picture of how the entire community actually appreciates and takes a look at each of the ascendancies. If you wanted to really super duper nerd out and go really heavy in on the data, you'd need to weight these. All the numbers are here. You can always go in and make a copy of the document yourself if you want to weight these and see what it's like. But you can see something of the average number of players in the league format that you are playing who are going to be building certain sorts of ascendancies. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single player who's playing an ascendancy is playing one particular build. We all know that. But chances are, out of the, almost 8,000 players playing Deadeye in softcore, chances are a whole bunch of them are playing either Lightning Arrow or Elemental Hit of the Spectrum. Guess what? That means if you want to craft for that target audience, which is a massive percentage of the league, you've got a huge amount of data to tell you exactly what sort of items those players are going to be looking for. The same can be said for Necromancer. It can also inform you as a buyer and as a player yourself as you're looking for things. If you are playing, let's say, a Gladiator and you're looking for items that are, perfectly rolled and really well rolled for block, you're not going to have a massive supply of those. But there's also not a great demand for those sorts of items. So if somebody accidentally makes a great defensive shield that, let's say you're playing some ridiculous Gladiator block build, well, great. Or maybe a dual wielding Gladiator build for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe you're playing a bow bleed build. I don't know. The 525 of you out there that are playing Gladiator, I don't know. The point is that if you identify a build that you're actually playing that not a whole lot of players are playing, if you're in a trade environment, that gives you leverage, because while there's going to be less players who are in demand for those items, it means that the people who make those items by accident or find those items and list them are going to sell them for cheaper amounts, which actually makes it really, really nice. This is one of the reasons why a lot of players on League Start choose not to go with a particular meta pick. Even if the meta pick is strong, economically, players don't necessarily want to compete in those environments, in those spaces, for the price points that they're going to need to be able to acquire in order to purchase the gear that they need to be able to meet the thresholds to take on the content that they want to enjoy in that league. Let's do a bit of review. All of that was kind of 30,000 foot overhead. What's just the brass tacks, Iron, right? Some of you are like, okay, bald man, just tell me economically, how do I make currency based off of all this data? Well, you're going to leverage this data either as a buyer or as a seller in general. Those are your two ways that you're going to leverage the data, right? Either as a player that is looking for gear to improve your own character, or as a player who has found materials to craft, or who has found an item, or who's crafting an item, or who's just looking at the market and maybe is buying and flipping, right? You can leverage all of this data for your economic advantage in the 324 Necropolis League. Here's how to do it in a nutshell. 3 easy things to keep in mind as a buyer. Because you know data about how players are making decisions, you can firstly acquire gear at a less inflated price. Because you're a buyer and you know where your build stands in relationship to the rest of the economy and the rest of the meta of player choices, you can now make better decisions about the gear that you acquire at a less inflated price. Let me give you a real quick example of this. If you're playing a character that is using a quiver, well, maybe a quiver for you is going to be just an awesome item, and maybe there's an end game quiver in particular with certain rare rolls that you're really hoping to get. Maybe it's a mirror tier quiver that you're hoping to acquire. That's probably not going to be something that you're going to acquire on day 1 or day 2 or day 3. It might be something that someone acquires or someone else crafts, but probably not you and not me. So as a buyer, what can we do? Well, this gives us more options to acquire more gear that is going to incrementally get us closer towards that mirror tier quiver that we're looking for, because we know there's a whole bunch of other players out there who are also playing bow-based builds and who are going to be making, crafting, finding, searching, identifying quivers. It means that there's going to be a greater supply of quivers, which ultimately is going to drive the price down on a whole bunch of different quivers, because there's going to be a demand for the top end of quivers, and everything else that's not the top end is going to have a reduction in price overall. So you can acquire more gear for your character as you upgrade your character for a less inflated price. Secondly, you can avoid meta builds entirely that have too high a price point for you. Maybe you're not league started yet, right? A lot of us got to league start over the weekend. Others are going to league start this week. Maybe you're in the boat where you're league starting a day or two behind. I actually oftentimes enjoy league starting a day or two behind because it lets you have a view and a shape and an idea of what the meta is like, both in player decisions, but also economically. So you can actually choose if you want to. Let's say you were interested in playing a particular meta build. Maybe you wanted to play Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction, but now you see that, like, well, there's thousands of other people who are playing that right now. It might actually be, yes, there's a supply of items out there, but it might be really tough to get together 1 or 2 pieces of the build and I really want to play something else before I'm actually, set in my ways in a particular build. And maybe that particular build is going to be outside of my price point. And so I just want to avoid it in order to avoid all of the inflation that's going to go along with the top end of gear for that build. So by having the knowledge about what's going on in the opening weekend meta and player choices, you can avoid pigeonholing yourself into playing a build that is far too expensive or has got breakpoints that might be far too expensive. Maybe you get the build up and running. Shout out to anybody down in the comments like me who has ever played a League Starter build and you've gotten the League Starter going and you go to white maps, you go to yellow maps. I want to say this happened to me in Metamorph or maybe it was Blight. I think it was Blight that this happened to me, where I had a League Starter in mind. I was playing. It was great. I had all the necessary components to make the build work and to get early on into maps. And then I started looking at my upgrades to my character to push further into maps, to get into reds and to start taking down the pinnacle bosses at the time. And I just realized that the threshold and the difference, the gap between where my character was and where my character needed to be in order to continue to progress was just too high. And so I needed to pivot, right? I needed to pivot away from that particular character. If I would have paid more attention to the meta and to specifically the economic meta of how the price points were being shaped for crafting and for pricing out those items that I would have needed on my character, I would have been able to make a decision even before I clicked on character creation. Yeah, I don't actually want to play that character because that character might reach a threshold that it's going to be too far for me to be able to reach to actually acquire new gear in order to be able to push content. So I'll pivot away from that League Starter to maybe this other League Starter that has got more achievable upgrades for my character to be able to take on the content that I want to take on for this league. And ultimately, it's all about having fun. And so that allows me to enjoy my character for a longer period of time. So you can avoid meta builds that have too high a price point and all of the headaches that come from that by leveraging the knowledge that you have of the opening weekend. And thirdly, we've mentioned this in a couple of examples already in discussion, you're just going to have more options for upgrades if you leverage your knowledge of the meta, okay? There's going to be a lot of characters who, after the opening league weekend, are going to be getting rid of all sorts of gear, right? People are transitioning from junk rares that are just there for stats to all sorts of different unique items that are going to enable all sorts of wonderful interactions for their build to be able to unlock new content and take on new content and unlock new and awesome combos for their build. Players are going to be both acquiring those uniques as well as crafting rares that are just going to be ridiculously strong in comparison with what's available over the opening weekend. So this means you're going to have more options for upgrades because you're paying attention to all of the things that players who are pushing the ladder, that are pushing the top echelons of content in Path of Exile for experience, you're going to be able to pick up what they have dropped off. You're going to be able to acquire the items that those players are going, yep, I'm moving on from this because I am moving more towards my mirror gear. And for the rest of us who are not at mirror tier gear yet or are not competing on the ladder in those sorts of frames of reference, we can actually benefit because we can pick up one man's trash as another man's treasure, and we can be the beneficiaries of that principle on our characters, even as we're playing in the first opening week. Well, what about as a seller? If you have knowledge of the economy, this is where I am most excited to chat today. And so I'm just going to keep this brief. We're not going to go long, but this is where you make massive amounts of currency. Yes, you make massive amounts of currency on opening weekend if you play the league and you play the content that you want to play, and so you're efficient, you're not interacting too much in trades, you're just boom, 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 collecting a lot of things. That's great. That's wonderful. If you want to make a ton of currency over opening weekend league of a league start, one of the things to do is to leverage what you know about the league starters that are recommended usually by people on Twitch and YouTube. These are people giving away free information. These are people who have got hundreds of thousands of people who watch their videos, tens of thousands of people who then make decisions based off of what they watch. You can go into a league knowing, well, it seems like a lot of players are talking about Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction. What are the sorts of items that necromancers use on a Detonate Dead build? What can I craft? What can I be looking for? What can I be fine-tuning my loot filter for in order to make sure that I'm keeping my eye out, because there is 100% going to be a target audience for me to craft and sell items to. I already have got people who are going to be very, very excited because we drop X, Y, and Z item, or we craft X, Y, and Z item, or we're finding X, Y, and Z item on the market that's underpriced, and so we're going to buy it and we're going to flip it. There's lots of different ways to approach this, but targeting your audience early on and knowing how to target your audience based off of the information that we've got both pre-league as well as over the opening league really will set you a leg up on where you used to be as a player in terms of your economy, in terms of your stash. Secondly, it allows you to know which markets to avoid or invest heavily into. So there are going to be times where you're going to strike gold on a market, on a particular flip, on a particular craft, or on a particular drop. And you're going to go, okay, this content now becomes exactly what I farm because this thing can drop here. Or this particular live search is what I'm going to have up because the flip is ridiculously profitable right now. Or I need to go out and collect these sorts of crafting materials because this craft right now has such and such percentage chance of being successful. And let's say every time it's successful, it pays for 7 more attempts for me to do this. And each one of those has got like a 50-50 chance of hitting. So that's a massive profit margin on the risk reward sale. So knowing which markets to heavily invest into and which markets to avoid, because there's going to be times where all of a sudden other people are going to notice, hey, if I do that craft, it's like a 50-50 success fail. And every time I sell that 50-50, I'm paying for 7 more attempts. That's a massive turnaround. Or maybe there's a flip out there. Maybe there's a div card flip that you can buy for 2 or 3, chaos, but it turns into something later on once you combine the cards, potentially into something that's worth a divine or 2, depending on the outcome. That's absolutely massive. But as other players become aware of that, and oftentimes this is the economic playing of Path of Exile, other players and traders will become very aware of those gaps in the market as you hit those gaps in the market. So be aware. You need to pay attention not only which markets to get into, but also as your returns potentially shrink because other players enter that market, you can be aware based off of the player data, there are going to be other people hunting this particular market, and I need to back out of it. Lastly, when you recognize you need to back out of something, knowing what's going on in the player meta over the opening week allows you to be flexible in your diversity of options for investing. So you've made a chunk of currency because you've been paying attention to your target audience and you've known which markets to get into and you've made wise decisions about when to pull out of those markets. Now you need to be flexible about where you're going to go next. Just like how your character, this is part of the brilliance and just mind-blowing bald bearded beauty of Path of Exile, not only for characters, but also for playing the economy. Your character has upgrades that you're looking for, right? And there's a gap between what you have now and like the best in slot mirror tier item for it, right? And there's several things along the way that might fill out for your character. Economically, the same thing is true. Not only are you searching when you're looking to diversify your portfolio of investment in Path of Exile, not only are you looking for, the mirror tier, the best ratio, the best return on investment, there's going to be other sorts of upgrades that you're going to find along the way, other sorts of little markets that you can invest into and still be reaping rewards along the way. You can cast a wide net and find out, hey, maybe there's 4 or 5 markets that are really profitable right now instead of just 1. And so you can put your currency to work, making more currency for you because you've learned how to diversify with the currency that you've already produced and to go out and to find more markets to hit. You know which of those markets you should be looking for and hitting because you've got an awareness of what players are looking for and what items players are searching for on the trade website because you know what sort of builds players in general are playing. If you're like trying to sell items that are targeted for a gladiator build right now, you got like 500 players that are searching for that, and they're not all online at the same time. If you're building something for Deadeyes and Inquisitors, you've got like thousands of players who are looking for those items. So maybe you should pick up some calling wands and start maybe throwing some crafting materials at them because even if it's bad, there might be somebody else out there that's willing to pay a good price for it and give you a return on your investment that you can then flip and diversify into even more different market spaces. Well, how did your opening weekend go? Mine went very well. I actually got to set a record time for me getting through the campaign on a league start. It was sub 9 hours. It was just over 8 hours. It was like 8 hours and 15 minutes getting all the way up from league start through to maps, which that was really great for me. I was really proud of that and really thankful for that, because I haven't played softcore Path of Exile really in any kind of like pressured wanting to race through and get to map scenario for like a year or so. I've just kind of taken my time and played a lot of Ruthless. So I'm really glad to be back and enjoying softcore this league and making lots and sorts of discussions just like this one, talking about the economy, talking about player choices, and talking about different tips and tricks for enjoying the 324 ongoing Necropolis League. Anyway, that's how my league start went. How did your league start go? I chose a Elementalist Frostblink character because it's going to allow me to go very quickly, which it has, and to progress into maps, which it has, and then to pivot off of Elementalist to then go and try out a Necromancer playing all the sorts of different Spectres that are available and all the sorts of different Summoner setups that are available. That's my plan for the league, at least for my league starter. So my opening weekend went really well. I hope yours did too. Lastly, can you answer a question down below in the comments? When did you make your final decision? This is going to be my league starter. Was it during the week leading up to league start? Was it like literally as soon as you clicked on character creation? Was it actually after the league started and maybe you watched a video, maybe you were paying attention to the meta and maybe you decided this is going to be my build? Nope, that one is not going to be my build. Drop a comment down below. Let me know answers to those questions. I always appreciate all of your comments. I try to get back to each and every one of you. So thanks so much for watching today and for enjoying the discussion. I've enjoyed making it. Hopefully you've enjoyed and learned something from it. But I'm back. I'm bald. I'm bearded. And I am ready to go. Let's go and have a wonderful 324 Necropolis League. I hope this league is the league. A Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.